Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you might be around the world. Thank you for joining us today, or joining me today, I guess. My name is Eric Naiburg, and I'm the Chief Operating Officer here at Scrum.org. And I'm going to talk about professional Scrum and hopefully give you a brief introduction to what is professional Scrum. Briefly, a little bit about me. I've spent the majority of my career and my life in product ownership and product management, mostly in software development companies. Done some time working on infrastructure and cloud companies and written a few books, UML for Mere Mortals and UML for Database Design. And I put this picture up not because it's cool, although it is, or at least I think it is. One of the guys in the background there, actually, the one on the far left with his arm around the guy with the sunglasses on his hat is a former major league pitcher. His name's Oil Can Boyd. You may be familiar with him if you're a Red Sox fan, especially. I had the luxury that day of catching him in a baseball tournament, and I use this picture because it really, to me, puts a little bit of a view on Scrum in what Scrum is. Scrum is an empirical process. Scrum is an empirical process all about we inspect and we adapt to continue to learn so that we can continue to improve. And the people doing the work are empowered to self manage. As a catcher, and I think actually specifically back to that day, I have to make decisions. I can't wait for my manager to tell me what to do. I can't wait for my owner to tell me what to do. I have to make those decisions in the moment. And on that day, Oil Can, his curveball was just not working. And at one point, so I stopped calling it. And at one point, he called me out to the mound and said, "Hey, why aren't you calling the curve?" Now, I'm just some software dude, and he's a major league baseball pitcher. And I had to struggle a little bit to tell him, yeah, I'm not calling it because it's not working. But I was empowered to do that and empowered to have that conversation. And we had that trust between us as teammates to do that. And when I think about Scrum, Scrum is very much like that, empowering the team, making decisions, and the team has to trust each other and trust that we together are making the right decisions to help the whole team move the product and the project forward. So I tell that little story. It's kind of fun. It's kind of cool, and it really, to me, sets some of the mindset for what we're going to talk about today. So first, let's set some context. Many of us are living in certainly interesting times, or really all of us are. Nobody expected COVID to come. Nobody expected certainly to be doing what we're doing. I was supposed to be in person today in an audience, but what happened? I couldn't get into New York City. I couldn't visit the group and couldn't spend that time. We have to adjust. We had to learn to change. We had to learn to evolve, and we're all evolving and certainly evolving much more quickly than we ever did before. What COVID has triggered in many ways is what potentially is the next turning point. When we think about the industrial age was a turning point. We started to introduce some software to automate things. We started to do some things. And as we grew and learned and improved, there was a turning point, an inflection point in how people worked and what people did. We evolved into this digital age where things became more electronic, things became more available. People and teams started working on software to drive many businesses. And that turning point now is happening again. We're starting to see the need to evolve, the need to change. And we need to do it even more quickly, or our competitors will eat our lunch. We'll start to run into opportunities that pass us by. And what we've seen over the last year and a half now is exactly that. The organizations who are able to pivot, who are able to be more agile, were able to succeed over the last year and a half. I even look at our business. At Scrum.org, one of the things we do is training. And all of our training, 100% of our training in February of 2020 was in person. Well, that had to change. We had to change how we delivered, what we delivered, the way it was delivered, the material itself. uh, get experience for trainers to be able to teach virtually, which is a completely different engagement for students. We had to be agile. We had to make that shift. And we were able to do that and continue to be successful. And organizations have to do that more and more today than ever before. So, what does that mean? If we think about the past, we think about the Industrial Revolution, right? Oil and gas and mass production, long term investments, big planning horizons. In the age of software and digital, we're short. We do invest, we plan, we invest, we plan. We have to turn things around more quickly. In the world of production, short term profits. Now it's more about mission and impact and so on. So we have to really change and really evolve how we're thinking to succeed. And Agile and Scrum help me to do that. If we're lucky at all, we can control some of that chaos. We've had a lot of chaos over the last year and a half or so, and we need to control it the best that we can. Can we control it all? No. Do we know what's going to happen tomorrow? No, we don't. But what we need to do is be able to start to get some control over it, or at least control over how we deal with it so that we're able to continue to evolve and grow. So I just wanted to set that stage a little bit and just kind of think about some of the things that have happened over the long term, but also in the short term, because we have some real opportunities to reflect now and some real opportunities to think about how did we react to change and what do we need to do to react to change in the future. Scrum has reached 25 years old. As a matter of fact, it's almost 26 years old. It was introduced in 1995 by Ken Schwaber and Jeff Sutherland at an event called Oopsla. At that event, they talked about Scrum and the ideas behind it. How do you move as a team the product forward? How do you work better together? Scrum actually predates the Agile Manifesto, for those of you who are familiar with it. The Agile Manifesto was introduced in 2001. And if you're not familiar with it, you can check it out. Just Google Agile Manifesto or agilemanifesto.org. So Scrum was the first Agile process before Agile was really talked about. And what Scrum provides me is that ability, that framework for working together. People will often ask, is Scrum an acronym for something? Or is Scrum named after rugby? And no, it is not an acronym. And yes, it actually is named after rugby. Those of you familiar with Scrum or with rugby, and many of us who are not, like myself, there's one thing we probably know about rugby. There's a bunch of people in a circle that do something. Well, that circle is called a scrum. And what it is the team working together to push the ball forward toward its goal. Scrum, as we're talking about today, is about the team, the people, working together to push the product forward toward a product goal and toward a sprint goal. So let's talk more about that. Scrum is about dealing with complexity. You can see here a couple of different models and a couple of different examples. We have different types of products and different types of projects. We have simple ones, we have complicated, we've got complex, those ones where we don't really know where we're going, but we know that we want to get somewhere and we have some sort of ideas. And then we have anarchy. Scrum is best focused in that complex environment. When we have an idea of where we want to go, we want to set a goal, but we're constantly learning about that goal as we go. So we're constantly learning about how we want to change and how we want to evolve toward that goal as we move forward. Scrum being an empirical process, as I talked about, focuses in that complex and complicated environment. In Scrum, we probe, we sense, we respond. Traditional methods are often called waterfall, are where we think we know everything up front, build a huge plan on how we're going to get there, work for some period of time, and then deliver the product. What we found historically is often we deliver the wrong thing. We don't meet our timelines. We don't meet our budgets. We don't satisfy our customers, in which case we don't deliver value. With Scrum, we're doing this in short cycles and we're constantly working to get feedback. That feedback is critical. So rather than working in long chunks before we get feedback, we're going to take that to 30 days or less. And we're going to get feedback on an ongoing basis to ensure we're heading in the right direction. But also, we're going to get feedback from ourselves on how we're working to improve our processes, to improve the way that we're working as we go forward. So, when I think about Scrum, I can think about it in two ways. Mechanical Scrum, I do all of the events, I have a Scrum Master, I have a product backlog, and I go through the motions. Or I can really live and breathe Scrum through a set of values and principles. When I see organizations who are doing what I'd call that mechanical Scrum, often they're not very successful. When they actually change their mindset, change how they think, change how they work, that's where success comes in. As we talked about earlier, Scrum is an empirical process. And empiricism is all about transparency, inspection, and adaptation. And through transparency and constant change, constant reviewing where we are and where we're going, we start to build that trust. Scrum also has a series of values: courage, focus, commitment, respect, and openness. And by living and breathing those values helps the team build that trust both inside the team and outside of the team with customers, with stakeholders, with executives, management, and whoever else within the organization may be put into place. Now, there's some great case studies and some great information out there around exactly this. I've seen one organization, for example, they did what they called a Scrum reboot. They'd been doing Scrum for a few years and they found they weren't being very successful. And what they did was they investigated, well, what's happening? Now, it's very easy, just blame the process and move on. But they were smart about it. They really started to interview the people. They really took a retrospective approach on what was working and what wasn't working. What they found was they were going through the motions, but they weren't living these values. They weren't constantly evolving the process. They weren't constantly inspecting how they worked and improving how they worked. And they weren't looking at the Scrum values. People on the team didn't respect each other. They didn't feel it was a safe space to have the courage to talk and to bring up problems and to improve how they work. So they revamped what they did. They trained each other on how to live the values and live the principles rather than just going through the motions. And they've been quite successful ever since. But they also always have to remind themselves of it. It's not just, okay, we're going to do it and now move forward. Let's revisit it. Let's put a working agreement in place and revisit it. Maybe it's on a monthly basis during our retrospective, for example. Let's make sure that we continually trust each other and build that trust and retain that trust. So the Scrum framework is fairly simple. If you read the Scrum guide, so the Scrum guide is the body of knowledge of Scrum. It's only about 15 pages. Um, Ken and Jeff, who I mentioned earlier, write and continue to maintain the Scrum guide. And the idea is Scrum as a framework allows process to evolve. So it's not going to be what we'd call a methodology where it tells us what to do at every step of the way. Teams are different. Teams act differently. They have different sets of skills. They have different things coming at them from their organization. So those teams have to create a process around them to be successful. They build that on top of the Scrum framework. They'll bring in different practices, maybe practices from XP, extreme programming, maybe practices from test driven development, maybe practices from Kanban to improve flow and measurement. And they'll bring different practices in to evolve and create their overall process of how they work. And they're constantly reviewing it. This framework is the view of a single sprint. A sprint lasts 30 days or less, or a month or less. And that sprint is an opportunity to do work, deliver something of value, whether it gets delivered in production or not, that's going to depend on the organization, but something to the point where we can get feedback and keep improving and keep moving forward, making sure we're going in the right direction. Ken tells a story. He was brought into an organization very early on when working in Scrum. And Ken Schwaber was brought in and told, and this was a financial services company who was getting into the online trading business. And they'd been around for quite a long time. And they were starting to have their lunch eaten by companies who were new startups who were just doing online trading right out of the gate. And they had been working for about 18 months and not been able to deliver anything. What Ken said was, give me a team of 10 people and enough to support them for 30 days, and we'll deliver something. And that's what they did. They went out, they started to build something, and within 30 days, they had enough that they could get feedback from users. They had enough so that they could deliver a small increment of some work, something that was working to get feedback to make sure they were heading in the right direction. And then they added a little bit more. And then they added a little bit more. And they were able to quickly get something into market rather than trying to boil the ocean, right? Build this whole gigantic thing. They built it, got feedback, built a little more, got feedback, and continued to improve. And that's what Scrum is all about. So it starts with a product goal. That product goal is where we want to get to. It provides the why. It provides the vision for where we're heading. The product goal will likely change in some ways as we learn over time. Not in drastic ways, hopefully, but we're going to learn and we're going to continue to evolve. And we're going to always ask ourselves that question. Is the work we're doing helping us to achieve that goal? Is it sending us in that direction? And that goal is critical. It's a commitment. We're committing to try to achieve that goal as we move forward. That product goal lives in what we call the product backlog. That product backlog is a set of capabilities that we are managing in order to reach that product goal. The product backlog is a prioritized list. It might be, as it's demonstrated here, some smaller things, some bigger things. And as they come up in prioritization, hopefully scope down to work that we can accomplish within a day or less so that we're able to start to get that work and start moving forward. The product backlog is owned by what we call the product owner. And we'll talk about that in a few minutes. And that product owner is working with stakeholders, working with the Scrum team, working with lots of people to help define the product in order to meet that product goal. The product backlog is what drives all of the work that we're going to do throughout the sprint and future sprints. The sprint, what can we do in, say, the next 2 weeks or the next month or the next week, depending on how we define our sprints for our organization or really for our team, because we may be at different sprint lengths depending on the team and the activities that are happening. The sprint starts with sprint planning. The team gets together and talks about the sprint goal. And that sprint goal is, what do we want to achieve this sprint? And then we pull things from the product backlog into the sprint backlog that we want to achieve to meet that sprint goal. That sprint planning meeting is an opportunity for the team to get together and talk about that goal, maybe size items, but and look at what do we think we can achieve and what are some things that maybe are in the way that we're going to need help to achieve as well. And they start to populate that sprint backlog. One of the myths that I hear quite often is, coming out of sprint planning, I have a complete sprint backlog. That's not necessarily true. As a matter of fact, if you do, you've probably scoped too much and you're not going to achieve it. All we need is enough to get started, maybe for a few days. Because as we start building, as we go through the process, we're going to learn and evolve. And we can pull more work in as we learn and evolve, focused on that sprint goal rather than trying to fill it all up and then feeling like we didn't achieve what we set out to achieve and losing focus of that sprint goal. And also losing focus of empiricism, losing focus of the ability to inspect and adapt, the ability to get that feedback all along the way and make changes as we move forward. The daily scrum happens every day. It should happen at the same time in the same place every day. Consistency is important and consistency is good. And it's an opportunity. It's a 15-minute meeting or less because it's a time box. We don't have to use the full 15 minutes. And it's an opportunity for us as a development team, the developers within the Scrum team, and the Scrum Master and product owner can attend but don't have to. It's an opportunity for them to look at, is anything in the way? Is there anything I need help with? Is there any reason we think we won't meet our sprint goal? What sort of work are we going to do today or in the next 24 hours that we need to plan for? What help might I need? Are there impediments? Are there dependencies? Uh, are there changes to the process we need to make because I'm not able to achieve the goal and so on? And it's really an opportunity not to be a status meeting, and it shouldn't be a status meeting. It's an opportunity to really focus on the sprint goal and what are we going to do to achieve it. That's Scrum, just like I talked about in rugby. As we complete the sprint, one of the things we're doing is throughout the sprint, we're delivering something. It could be marketing material, it could be software, it could be bottles. It depends on what we're using Scrum for. Scrum's used in many, many industries and in many ways. But the combination of what was delivered throughout the sprint is called the increment. What we do is we then review that at the end of the sprint. And we review it with stakeholders, not just the team. So we can get real feedback, whether it's customers, internal stakeholders, management, consultants, whoever. But it's those stakeholders to give us feedback to make sure we're heading in the right direction. It's not a demo. I often hear people talk about we're going to go to the sprint demo now. The problem is, in my mind, and often in many minds, demo means sales. And it's not there to sell what we just delivered or what we've done. It's there to get feedback. So it's a mindset change from, hey, here's all the great things we've done, love them, to here are all the great things we've done. Let us know if we're doing well. Let us know if we're heading in the right direction. Let us know what we can evolve. And let us know what's great too. So it's an opportunity to inspect and adapt the product, that increment, and get feedback on that. And lastly, the sprint ends with what's called the sprint retrospective. This has to be a safe place. You don't want people not on the Scrum team in that retrospective. It's an opportunity for the team itself to inspect and adapt how they work, what they've done the last sprint, and how they can improve. Often improvement items will come out of that sprint retrospective and be added to either the next sprint or at least to the product backlog to make sure we're capturing those and working on improving ourselves, not just improving the product. Because if we don't improve ourselves, we'll start to slow down our ability to improve the product. Uh, I had a conversation one day with Ken Schwaber about this and why would we add those things to the product backlog or even the sprint backlog? And he said, if we don't do that, we'll always focus on the product and not the people. If we add them to the product backlog, now they get visibility to everybody. We actually can prioritize not just improving the product, but we can prioritize us. We can prioritize the team and how we're working as a team. That is some of what makes this professional Scrum, not just going through the motions. We're looking at ways to improve. We're making sure that we're always improving and working through those improvements as well. So that's it. It's that simple. This is Scrum. A lot of the things I talked about into the detail is what makes it professional Scrum. Going beyond just those events, going beyond just the activities that happen. Well, who is part of that scrum? There are three accountabilities in Scrum: the product owner, and there's one product owner per product. That product owner is responsible for maximizing the value that's being delivered. The developers, the ones doing the work. And developer doesn't mean software developer, it's anybody doing the work. And then the Scrum Master. The Scrum Master's role is to help the team succeed and to be there to help serve the team and support the team. The Scrum team must have all of the skills it needs to deliver a done increment. Ideally, more than one team member has the same competencies. So if they're out, if they're sick, if they leave, we still can fill those gaps. We often talk about things like pie-shaped people and comb-shaped people and the like, T-shaped people. Uh, it's about making sure we have all of the skills on the team to be successful, and hopefully we start to cross train. We start to learn from each other, so that we're able to satisfy all of the needs. If somebody's not there, we can pick up that slack for another person, and so on. The Scrum teams are self-managed. They must extend to everybody. Everybody must support that and support it. The stakeholders, so management, project managers, executives, whoever, need to enable and empower the teams to be successful. They need to respect the self-management capabilities of the team, the developers, the scrum master, the product owner. And they need to help that. And everybody must allow that and support it. I go back, and that's why I tell that baseball story. I always think about it and imagining, what if the person not closest to what's going on is making the decisions? From behind the plate, I can see that action on the ball. You can't see it from the dugout. You can't see it from center field. I can see exactly what's happening. A third base coach is reacting, sending somebody to home or stopping them in the moment. They can't wait for somebody not in the moment to make those decisions. It's the people closest to the work, the people closest to what's happening, that can make those educated decisions. It doesn't mean they don't ask for help. It doesn't mean they may not go and get more feedback. And certainly they should be improving how they're doing it over time and learning from the goods and the bads, but empowering those teams to be successful, empowering the individuals to make decisions, having working agreements in place, and having shared values, shared goals, and those shared commitments is critical. So, what does it all mean? What are we talking about here? So the core ideas are pretty simple, right? We talked about empiricism or empirical evidence. We're going to drive and evolve our process based on what we learn and how we learn it. We're no longer going to run the system. Instead, we're going to learn. We're going to do what we need to do to be successful, and we're going to continue to evolve it. We're going to continue to change it. We're going to empower our teams and have them focused on outcomes. People are not resources, and they're not allocated to lots of things. Keep them focused and empower them to make the decisions. We can't just plug and play people. People have knowledge, people have experience, people have passion. And the more we can give them that passion, the better off we are. There's a great book out there by a gentleman, Daniel Pink, called Drive, Drive. And it talks about what drives people. And yes, money is a factor, but it's not the only factor. And often it's a smaller factor. It's the satisfaction that people get from being successful. It's the interactions with other people and all of those things that drive people to success by empowering them to feel like they have ownership over what's happening, like they are in control, and they are, gives them that drive to want to do more and help people succeed. And lastly, improvement. We're always improving the work and how we work. Nobody owns the process, nobody owns the product other than the people doing the work. The product owner is responsible for delivering value and the team on how they're going to deliver it. So, to do it right, it requires those things, the Scrum values that we talked about. It requires working with the users, whether customer is a broad term. Customer could be an internal customer or a user, an external customer, and the like. It requires discipline. We need to be able to shut off outside influences when it makes sense and bring them in when it makes sense as well. And we need to constantly be willing to learn and accept. It's one of the hardest things to me that I think we run into. We need to be able to learn and take feedback and change and evolve based on that feedback. So, with that, in summary, Scrum, don't leave your brain at home. I love that little tagline. I forget who came up with that. But uh, everything we talked about today is about learning and changing as we learn, and evolving and growing as we learn. And if we leave that brain at home, we're just going to go through the motions. We're not going to take a left turn. We're just going to stay straight and stay straight and stay straight. We need to be thinking. We need to be respecting the team. We need to be respecting our stakeholders and doing what's right for all of them to continually improve. Scrum provides that foundation for this, but you, the people doing the work, are the ones who are going to thrive and really create that process. So, with that, who is Scrum.org? Just a little bit about us. I've talked about that guy, Ken Schwaber, a bit. Here you can see who he is. There's a picture of Ken. Ken is the co creator of Scrum and the founder and chairman of Scrum.org. Scrum.org provides consistent global learning and a global community for learning through thought leadership, like the Scrum Guide, like this presentation, ongoing training, certification, and learning to help people and teams solve complex problems. Feel free to reach out to me if you have questions. I'm happy to help in any way that I can. And with that, I'd just like to say thank you very much.